Den Haag, or The Hague in English, is a centuries-old Dutch city in the west of the Netherlands. It's the political hub of the Netherlands, with it being home to the Dutch Parliament and Senate, and they are generally seated at the oldest, still in use for its original purpose, parliament in the world. It's called the Binnenhof. Not now though, because there are renovations going on. But Den Haag is also home to the International Court of Justice, International Crime Court, Permanent Court of Arbitration, and the headquarters of Europol, amongst others. So Den Haag is a pretty important Dutch city for both, the Netherlands as well as worldwide. When you've read the first part of the title, which says that why the Dutch city of Den Haag has 2 official names in Dutch, you probably first read 2 official names. Yeah, obviously Den Haag, The Hague, and then you came to the Dutch part and you were like, oh, say what? Yes. Den Haag has 2 official names, Den Haag and 's-Gravenhage. So we have Den Haag and 's-Gravenhage. And to get to the bottom of why this Dutch city has 2 names, we need to go back some time. Some centuries. Quite some centuries. We need to go back to the beginning of Den Haag or 's-Gravenhage, depending on which version you use. So we need to discover what these names mean, where they come from, and eventually learn as to why and when we use these names. And because we're on the subject of Den Haag anyway, you will also learn some basic history of the city, 2 vliegen in één klap. Which translates to, you slap 2 flies with 1 slap. You kill 2 flies with 1 slap. I prefer to hit flies instead of killing birds with a stone. So, it's the year 1242. And there's a certificate written which includes the name of Die Haag, which translates to the closed off area or hunting area. For account. The area was created when Floris V had a hunting castle built there, and it's the location of today's Binnenhof, or the location of today's Dutch Parliament. So Den Haag was founded as a small settlement at the Count's Court, and then in 1370. And Albrecht van Beieren gave the settlement of Die Haag some privileges, and also established the exact boundaries of the jurisdiction. Now over time Die Haag becomes more important, The area grows, and while it has the status of a village, it's sometimes also thought of as a city. Duke Karel de Stoute, or Charles the Bold of Burgundy, gave the village a new privilege on 22nd of August 1470. There he talks about the inhabitants of Ville de Haye, which translates to the city of Den Haag, so city. His daughter talked about our city of Den Haag in 1481, however her husband, Emperor Maximilian of Austria, he speaks of the village of Den Haag in 1485. So as you can see, it constantly switches between being seen as a village, or a city, or just a town, or now it's the 15th century. And this is the first time that we see the name 's-Gravenhage, or the hunting area of the Count. And this sort of more fancy name, it fits the status of Den Haag as a city a lot better, is what a lot of people seem to think. And with a lot of people, I mean people in the upper classes of society, people with power. Funnily enough, in the first half of the 16th century, people also speak about vlekken van Den Haag, or the speck of Den Haag, like the place isn't of any importance. So it's interesting to see how quickly something like that can change, even within the upper classes of society. Now from the 17th century, 's-Gravenhage had become the official name in official pieces, instead of any form of Den Haag. Obviously, with the evolution of Dutch, the name also changes with that. So while 's-Gravenhage was now used for official matters, Den Haag, or any version of that, was still used in day-to-day language. Now in the 16th century, even though Den Haag was called the speck of Den Haag, it was seen as a city on one hand, as they were one of the few places that were allowed to exercise crafts and industry. It was a privilege that was only granted to cities. Some underprivileged were also given to Den Haag. In 1553, small cities in the Holland area were protesting against the power of the 6 largest cities, which were Dordrecht, Haarlem, Gouda, Amsterdam, Leiden and Delft. Den Haag is one of the cities, not officially, but cities that is protesting, and from the 15th to the 16th century its governance was also equipped like that of a big and real city. And The Hague obviously also wanted to be recognized as an actual city instead of sometimes a village, other times a city, and other times a speck of dirt on a map. They were close. At the start of the 8-year War against the Spanish occupiers, which started in 1568, Den Haag was allowed to participate in the meetings of the states of Holland. And the other main cities, they didn't mind. However, at that time the financials of the city of Den Haag were really bad. It was so bad that they couldn't even find any money to send a good representation to the meetings for Den Haag, And their financials were a lot better in the 1580s. However, at that time the ship had sailed. And it was too late to become an important city in the States of Holland. The States of Holland rejected the request of Den Haag to finally be an actual city with all its rights and privileges. Slowly over time, more cities were added and were able to vote, in total 18. But yet, Den Haag was never a part of that. There were some more attempts of the town Den Haag to officially become a city with all its rights, but they all failed until the late 18th century. So why did they fail? It had to do something with the ridderschap. And the ridderschap is a group of nobility within a state, province, whatever you want to call it, that were sort of united, and they represented the countryside. And the village of Den Haag, Den Haag, was part of it. And they did not want to lose the town for two reasons. One, money. Den Haag paid a lot of taxes that the ridderschap had to pay, and they paid a big portion of the taxes. And if Den Haag would have become a city at that time, that meant that the rest of the ridderschap had to pay more taxes, as Den Haag wouldn't have been a part of it anymore. Two, power. The important cities in the Holland region are also against it, as it would mean that Den Haag would get their own vote, making the other votes of these cities slightly less important. But yeah, and since the Binnenhof or Dutch parliament was and is located in Den Haag, they also thought forward. Because what if Den Haag became a city? Or what if the magistrate of Den Haag would suddenly want to have something to say about the parliament building and its surroundings and parliament itself? And if it stayed a village, there was no chance of something like that even happening. So Den Haag had little importance, was more sort of a village town city with some city privileges. But yeah, it was easier for the states of Holland, not much competition. So now it's the 17th century and the official name of Den Haag has turned to 's-Gravenhage. Even though it was first written down in the 15th century, it was now time for it to become its official name. You might ask yourself, why? Den Haag was earlier? It was. It would fit better with the status of the residency and the countless attempts to get Den Haag recognized as a city, which again, it failed for many centuries. But they thought that the name change would also help with that. Perhaps it was so that the mocking of the elite in the country would stop and they would finally be taken seriously in their endeavors. So Den Haag, which with the evolution of the Dutch language, slowly changed in Den Haag, was still a village with more rights and privileges than most villages. Came very close to a city, but it wasn't a city. It didn't get the rights. They got another chance. In 1795, the French troops occupied the country and Den Haag got a new shot. The town, technically still a village, sends delegates to the new rulers of the Holland region, and it worked. They were finally, after waiting for centuries, able to participate on equal footing with the other important cities and could help decide on state affairs and had city rights. Now, unfortunately for Den Haag, it didn't last long. But not because they were kicked out or something, or the rights were taken back. No, in 1798 the distinction between cities and the countryside was lifted and only municipalities existed. So the only thing of being granted a city in the past is now just sort of status, something a few years ago with little importance. However, again, not all was lost. It's a recurring theme for Den Haag. Being a city partly in the past kind of worked for Den Haag because Napoleon, he wanted to make his official arrival to his residence special for him at least. He insisted when he arrived to Den Haag, he would have been given the keys to the city of Den Haag as a sort of offering. And that meant that he also saw it as a city. And, obviously they got city rights. However, Den Haag didn't have any keys to the city. Den Haag had never had city walls, nor city gate. So they didn't have any keys. So there were no keys, so the city council had 2 gilded silver keys made by a silversmith. They were then presented to the king on an embroidered cushion, and a few months later King Napoleon granted Den Haag the position of it being the 3rd city of the kingdom, the 3rd most important place. So these keys were eventually used 2 more times. Once with Emperor Napoleon, he entered the city in 1811, and he also had a gift to Den Haag. Den Haag was basically elevated by him to being a good city of the empire, and that meant that the mayors would be allowed to attend the coronation of Napoleon's successor. Now eventually it was time for the French to get out of the country. Bye bye, au revoir. The last time these keys were used was in 1813, when Prince Willem, later King Willem I, he entered in 1813. And under his rule, 's-Gravenhage or Den Haag was a city which gave it 4 seats in the provincial states of Holland. At that time, Zuid-Holland and Noord-Holland were still combined. When these two were split in 1840, Den Haag, 's-Gravenhage, ended up being the capital of Zuid-Holland. In 1848, the new Dutch constitution was finally up in the works, was introduced, was up and running, which included the concept of a city with city rights, that it lost its constitutional meaning for good. So Den Haag, or technically at that time 's-Gravenhage, was officially a municipality only, no city anymore, it wasn't important anymore. So funnily enough, at least for Dutch people, it is often thought that 's-Gravenhage is the oldest form of the current Den Haag, and that Den Haag is short for 's-Gravenhage. That is not the case, as you now know. 's-Gravenhage does sound fancier in my Dutch brain, but that is because as soon as you add the S, then for me it just sounds fancy. But that is the brainwashing that happened throughout all of those years, I guess. Another interesting fact is that Den Haag is very easy to translate. That is because it's the oldest version. So Den Haag has translations in English. In English it's The Hague. It has Den Haag for German. Then you have La Haye in French. Then you have La Haya in Spanish, and so on. And like I said, these translated names are also very old and come from the first name. Now the municipality of Den Haag uses Den Haag for a long time already. However, for its official things and documents, 's-Gravenhage is still used. They don't use Den Haag for that, they use 's-Gravenhage. Now, the reason they say that not only is Den Haag short and modern, but it's also easier internationally, and there are international translations. And since Den Haag is a very international city, it fits. And besides that, Den Haag is also the oldest. So in all official and legal documents, such as birth certificates, marriage certificates, those kind of things, they still use 's-Gravenhage for that. Why do they use the name 's-Gravenhage with these official documents and not Den Haag when most people use Den Haag? That's because of a decision made by the municipality of Den Haag. In 1990, the municipality voted on a proposition to change the official name of the municipality from 's-Gravenhage to Den Haag. Didn't pass, didn't go through, didn't happen. It was rejected. And ever since that moment on, the official name is still 's-Gravenhage, and everything on the official documents is also still 's-Gravenhage. Name Den Haag, however, is basically used for almost everything now, except for the official names and official documents, those kind of things. But yeah, they decided to use Den Haag, especially with its importance as an internationally politically important city.